Today's participants are Eric Johnson, and Marshall Schminke. We join their conversation in the faculty lounge.
With kind of my primary research areas. The other thing that I spend a good portion of my time doing is doctoral education. That's sort of why I landed at UCF. We were just kicking off a Ph.D. program in management. Actually, the College of Business was rolling out 3 Ph.D. programs in the fall of '99, which is when I arrived. And so my wife and I arrived here and picked up 2 of the 4 kind of core courses in the management area. She's trained as a psychologist and I'm trained more as a finance guy. And so we were able to pick up kind of the macro and micro level basic core management courses. And so we both put a lot of time in on with the doctoral program as well.
Certainly UCF being more of a metropolitan university, you probably get a lot more of the working student in the graduate level, or is that not true?
Yeah, I mean that's actually very true. Our master's programs, I think we have 5 or 6 different master's programs in the business college. We've got one in sports management. We've got one that's sort of a full-time, daytime cohort program that just got started. We've got a couple of specialty master's programs, one in management, another one in accounting, and I believe one in information systems as well. Excuse me, and almost all of those are populated with the exception of the daytime cohort program, almost all of the programs are taught in the evenings and weekends, and they're mostly full-time working people. And it's an absolute kick because it's such a, I mean, you can teach management at the undergraduate level, but most of the kids haven't really had much in the way of managerial experience, and so what they're far more interested in learning the finance skills, the economic skills, the accounting skills, the things that will land them that first job. They haven't quite gotten an appreciation yet of what it is what does it really mean to be a manager. I mean, all they really understand is I need some sort of technology that I'm in control of that's going to land me a good job. The graduate students, though, are almost entirely made up of people that already have a good technical skill in some area. Lots of them are engineers, some of them are nurses, some of them were undergraduate students that have been in marketing positions or something like that, sales positions, and they've picked up a couple of promotions, and all of a sudden now, instead of being a financial manager, they are now managing other people who are doing financial analysis.
They know how to evaluate people.
Yeah, exactly. And so they know they're pretty good at the numbers, but they don't really have much in the way of. They recognize their limitations, and now how do I get something out of these people that I'm in charge of? And so that makes the graduate students just an incredibly good time to teach, because they come to the class virtually every night with a problem that they're dealing with at work, with either supervisors or subordinates. And so if you're teaching them things like leadership and communication and managing teams, those are the kind of things that literally they go back to work the next day and they can try to implement those tools. And it's such an incredible kick when they show up the next week saying, it worked. I mean, I tried this new little thing and it worked. I've got this problem that I'm taking care of now. It worked. And with the undergraduates, you just don't get very much of that. You kind of plant the seeds and you hope that 5 years from now, when they work their way up to a level of responsibility, when they've got employees, they have some vague recollection that they learned about this as undergrads.
How many students? I don't even know how large the college is. I assume there's a lot of students.
We're the 2nd largest business school in the country right now. Yeah. Now that primarily that's made up of undergrads, and we service a number of regional campuses and things as well. But and I don't know the exact number on our graduate programs, but we have several hundred master's level students, and probably across the various departments we probably have about 50 or so doctoral students as well. Those are completely autonomous programs. There's almost no overlap between them.
So when did the doctoral program start?
The first class took its first courses the fall of '99
Okay.
when I showed up.
So when you came.
So my timing was excellent in that other people had done all of the heavy lifting on designing the program and working out. We had, and in the business college, there was a pretty tough debate actually about whether, if you're going to offer something beyond the master's level, whether it should be sort of a scholarly Ph.D. or a professional
Applied, yeah.
Ph.D. So are you going to try to allow people maybe who have 10 or 15 years of experience in finance or accounting or some technical area to come back and really hone those skills to a very high level with the intention of going back into industry? Or are you going to basically train college professors? And we chose the latter route, and so we are just nearly 100% research focused. I mean, we feel like our mission is to train people to go publish in the top journals in management and business more broadly. And we've been able to do virtually all of our hiring around that mission. And thankfully, we have folks around the department that have been around since, a couple of them since literally the day the university opened, who understand that that's a really valuable component. I mean, as you sort of lift the university up to a Carnegie One research status, that's a really valuable piece of the mission. And they have still been able to find ways to be incredibly strong contributors at the undergrad level and at the practical master's level. And so we have this really nice mix of people in the department with sort of different expertise, different kinds of training coming in. And we understand that them doing what they do allows us to do what we do with the PhD students. And so it's just a terrific place to be. I mean, it was one of those things when you arrive, you're always just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know, that it really can't be this perfect.
Can't be that
you know?
good.
And it's just been perfect. I mean, I just love being here.
It's funny because a lot of people, like speak for myself, actually, you don't really think of people going beyond the MBA in the business in a business college for or a PhD in business. But I guess is that something where students, that's something they always wanted to do, or they get to the MBA and think someday I'd like the academic side, or you know, how do you actually?
There's actually a couple of different tracks for that. We get we get lots of inquiries from people who already have MBAs. They're in practice, but they would just like to do something more. I mean, there's a type of person, and we are part of that type, who just sort of likes the additional learning and education and things, even if you continue to be in industry. And in business, there really aren't a lot of outlets for that. There's a degree called a DBA, a Doctor of Business Administration, rather than a PhD. At places like Harvard and Indiana actually continue to offer DBAs. But it's a relatively rare thing, and so most of the time when we end up getting inquiries from students who are or prospective students who are in industry, already have a master's degree, want to sort of take it to the next level, they don't quite get what it is we should do, and the number of those inquiries is sufficient enough to demonstrate, to me at least, that there's a real market for this out there. I think there's about somewhere between 80 and 90,000 new MBAs minted every year, and that trend has been going on since the mid-'80s. And so once, it used to be the MBA was sort of a rare degree, and now it's to the point where, I mean, I don't know what the percentages are of sort of working managers, but an extraordinarily high percentage of successful working managers have that degree. So if you want to differentiate yourself yet again from that group, there's kind of a demand for this other additional training where you could bring some additional expertise on top. MBA degrees, by and large, are a relatively generalized degree, and so people are looking for something
allows
more
the focus and
specialized. Yeah. So we get a lot of people that are sort of looking for that, and unfortunately we have to turn them all away because that's just not what we're doing. We knew that we wouldn't be able to be big enough to do multiple things well, and so we said, here's the niche that we're going to attempt to fill, which is training professors, training students to be professors at major research institutions, essentially. And I think we're well on the way to being pretty good at that. The kind of students that we get, some of them are people who have always just been really good at school, and they were in the business world, and it just never quite worked for them. I mean, when you were telling your story, they always had sort of in the back of their mind that someday I want to go teach, someday I want to, and we also need that, and I want to do research to go with that. And we get some of those, so we get sort of mid-career changing people. The other thing we get, and this is particularly true out of psych programs, is students in psych programs, and a lot of them are going through industrial or organizational psych programs, they understand what teaching and research and that whole mission is all about. And many of those students, even though maybe they go out and work for a year or two in industry to get a little practical experience, they knew right from the get-go that they were on a research track. And they turn out to be terrific students, because whereas business undergrads are primarily being trained as practitioners of something in the business world, psych undergrads, and some other areas, social psych and some others as well, really were trained with this, with one eye on a future in doing academic research at some point. So we find that when we can attract those kinds of students, they're really a little bit ahead of the game when they arrive.
So how many faculty members in the department?
We've got about, we've got sort of a funny mix in that we have, we've probably got about 20 full-time tenure track faculty members, but our school is so large, and it's 5,000 or 6,000 students. We have a lot of these massive sections that need to be covered, of sort of intro marketing and intro management, and intro accounting, and those kinds of things, that we carry another probably dozen or so full-time instructors, and then probably another couple dozen adjuncts of various sorts that we bring in to plug specific holes that we have. And it's actually a very nice mix, because as the students come through the program, then they get a pretty significant number of faculty members that are assistant, associate, and full professors on tenure track lines and with research interests, but they also get plenty of people who are out there doing these things every day. And if you're a sales management major or something like that, it's really important that somewhere along the way you have somebody that's actually out there doing sales to kind of keep you current on those sorts of skills. So we've got a very nice mix that way.
So that gives you a little more time for some of the doctoral students yourself.
That's right. I mean, we understand that if not for our ability to attract quality adjuncts and instructors, and typically they tend to be on a little larger, they're not expected to do research, so they're on a little larger little heavier teaching load, and that gives guys like me the freedom to have, a dozen students or a half dozen students in a doctoral seminar, and then you get to and then to get to work with them one-on-one on summer research papers and things like that. I mean, we know how fortunate we are to have people that can sort of carry the the heavy water, right? So that we can focus on the doctoral students.
Because you also mentioned you do research in ethics. Is that is that correct? It's always funny being a non-business person. Business ethics. Wait a minute.
I just gave a talk yesterday, actually, down at the Rotary Club downtown, and that's the first one everyone starts with. And it's interesting. I actually wasn't trained in that. My first couple of years as an undergrad, I was a philosophy major, and then quit school for a while and came back as a business major. And then in graduate school, I was more finance and strategic planning and that kind of thing. And I was doing some research, just my first couple of years out of graduate school, I was doing some research on organizational decline. And we were using some organizational simulations that would run over about a 16-week semester. And what we found in these simulations is we would institute various kinds of environmental shocks on these teams that were competing in these interactive industries. And if we hit these were graduate student and undergraduate student teams, but a large component of their grades were dependent on how they were running little airlines basically, and a large component of their grade was would be determined by how well their company performed. And what we discovered is if we hit them with severe enough economic shocks, we could make them do anything, basically. I mean, they would, even these teams that had sort of had the opportunities early in the simulation to do things maybe that were a little weaselly, and they didn't, they passed on those because they were very upstanding. So, if we hit the shock strong enough, all of these teams would just start.
See, there you go.
Yeah, and that was the thing, is that they would, what we found in this study, and they weren't studies about business ethics, they were studies about organizational decline and managing environmental turbulence and that sort of thing. And this little ethical component just kept bubbling up to us, and so this couple of years I had in philosophy kind of came bubbling back up to the top as well. I thought, this would be kind of interesting to study this. And so I really started kind of just retraining myself in that stuff after I took my first junior faculty job. And it probably took about 10 years of doing that as sort of a sideline research project before it became kind of the central part of what I do now. And now I'm just completely into it. There are just so many different ways. I'm sort of into studying ethical decision-making processes and kind of nonlinear non-rational, non-linear processes, and the impact of generically the field that I'm in is known as organizational behavior, and so we refer to as OB. So in business schools, if you say OB, it means this particular thing, and one of my missions is sort of to put the O back in OB, because it has become much, very much just sort of a straight psychological applications kind of thing. And what I like to do is kind of integrate the influence of the organization and the structure and the sort of the organizational architecture on the behavior of individuals in their jobs. And
does that mean constraining the individuals based on their place in an organization?
Well, there's actually several different ways of looking at it. Some of them are constraints that are built into the system. That if the organizational norms and rules and regulations and things are so strong, even though you might have individual tendencies, the organization can constrain those. But interestingly, different kinds of organization structures can actually enhance those individual tendencies. And so we talk about there being sort of two generic structural types. There are mechanistic structures, which tend to be very bureaucratic and rules-oriented, and they're essentially control systems. They're trying to sort of get uniformity in behavior. And those, nothing wrong with that. If you're running an army, or UPS or someplace, you want that, right? But if you're running a laser optics lab, the last thing you want is conformity and everybody thinking.
Creativity.
You want creativity and innovation and flexibility. And those are organic structures. And we know a lot from research about where we basically sort of a contingency perspective. It's not a matter of one structure being better than the other. It's conditions under which certain structures are better and people thrive in them, and conditions under which other structures thrive. So in a nutshell, that's what I do, and then I apply that, in this case, to business ethics, and how different sorts of organizational structures and different kinds of ethical climates and cultures can either constrain or enhance ethical behavior and kind of the ethical decision process that people bring to organizations. So that's what I do.
Yeah, because you mentioned you started in philosophy. That's quite a change.
Well, it is. It is.
Where was that at?
That was at Iowa, University of Iowa. Yeah. I went there. My older brother was an accounting major, and so of course the last thing I wanted to do was anything to do with business. And so I went there, and I was sort of, I was a joint philosophy religion major for the first 2 years, and then quit school for a while. And then when I came back, I realized at some point I'm going to have to have a job, and so I became a finance major just virtually overnight. And it was very nice then, after getting the first faculty job, to realize, okay, kind of the world is your oyster now. You can really study anything you want to. And to be able to take this integration of kind of macro level business issues that are sort of financial and economic and strategic in nature. And in grad school, I was trained primarily as sort of a micro managerial. We had a joint program with an industrial psych program at Carnegie Mellon. And to be able to integrate those two and then bring in this interest in ethics to boot. And it's one of the fun things about studying ethics is that you can do it at basically any level of analysis. There's all of this individual level sort of ethical decision-making process. There's organizational level issues of ethical climate, ethical culture, and there's sort of social level issues of corporate social responsibility and the impact of the legal system and the political system and those kind of things. And what I'm really into now is doing cross-level studies to look at sort of the effect of these factors at different levels on individuals.
So do you like put together a computational model of it?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, some of the things we're doing now is we're trying to do sort of three-dimensional representation, so we can look at kind of fit issues. You come to work and you bring to the workplace, this is where the philosophy comes in, a particular sort of ethical framework that you deal with. Well, it turns out organizations also have those things. There are various strengths of various types of ethical climates in organizations, and so you've essentially got a fit issue between how does your individual ethical framework fit with the norms and the values and the culture and the climate of your organization. And so then we can make predictions about the degree of fit and misfit along those things, and then we measure those things. There are instruments that you can use to do this sort of thing. We measure those, and then we can make predictions sort of in 3 dimensions about the degree of fit and misfit between any particular individual and then the group they're working in, and whatever sorts of outcomes you're interested in, whether it's employee productivity or commitment or unethical behavior, or the sky's the limit on the sort of outcomes that you can look at. So that's the sort of things we're doing now, is we try to do little sort of polynomial math modeling of these three-dimensional relationships in predicting different sorts of outcomes. And we're really just kind of getting started at that. We don't really know.
So what's the future then? I mean, what do you think in 30 years? What are you going to find in this, or what are they going to?
Well, one of the things that the field is really interested in right now is, I mean, and all you have to do is sort of pick up a newspaper and read stories of Enron and WorldCom and Martha Stewart, and the field is really interested right now in whether or not ethics is something that can be effectively trained in the workplace. You know, that something like 90% of all Fortune 500 firms have active ethics programs in place right now. And when you get up to the biggest companies, the Fortune 50, it's about 95%. But the big question is, under what conditions are those programs actually having an impact on individual level ethical behavior? And the preliminary news is actually pretty good about that. Most of these programs have only been initiated in the last 15 years or so. And so they're still developing and getting kind of better and stronger. But the news is just incredibly encouraging in terms of being able to actually go in and have a meaningful and lasting impact on sort of employees' general level of ethical awareness and their willingness to report unethical acts, and even just the number of unethical acts that they report observing. I mean, it's difficult to ask them, have you done unethical things, but you can do a pretty good job of asking them about the incidence rates of unethical behavior around their department, around their company.
It seems like a lot of it's at the extreme top now, where there's no check and there's no balance.
In fact, that's exactly what I research right now is the role of leadership on sort of the ethical climate of the organization, and to what extent does the sort of the morality of the leader, can that have an impact and sort of permeate the entire organization, or do those two things stay somewhat distinct? So that's exactly the stuff we're trying to, again, that's that kind of multi-level thing that up until the last 5 years ago, nobody has really been researching.
That's pretty neat.
We've done a lot of research at kind of how do I go about making an ethical decision, but we haven't really done much research at all linking the role of leadership or ownership in companies to kind of the general ethical climate of that company, and then in turn, does that translate down to kind of the average line employee? And so we're just starting to figure that out. And the news is, turns out it matters, that leaders really have these very demonstrable impacts on the ethical climates of their companies, and those climates have a demonstrable impact on the behavior of employees. And so I feel like we're just sort of laying down the basic building blocks at this point, so that for over the next 20 years or whatever, we'll be able to learn more about what sorts of things really do matter, what sort of things don't matter when it comes to ethical programs. What kind of things can we teach? What kind of things can't we teach? And then how do you manage that package of people you have to ensure that we, as we like to say, create and maintain ethical workplaces? It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's just really interesting.
But it seems like a lot of psychology too.
It's a lot of psychology. It's primarily probably the driving. This is another big switch that's happened in the field over the past 5 years or so, is that it's gone from being kind of models of philosophy and sort of moral thinking to behavioral science models of sort of flaws in decision-making processes, and what sort of biases and things do people bring to their we got these cognitive limitations in how we go about making decisions and things, and those things apply to ethical decision-making just like they apply to other kinds of managerial situations. So we draw a lot on psychology, social psychology, the decision sciences, that sort of thing. And now, so I think we're really poised now to start making this big breakthrough as we move. Not that we sort of abandon the philosophical side, because we still need to be able to conceptualize how people go about making moral judgments and that sort of thing.
Seems like, has anybody like if you take a board that's running a big Enron type corporation, and you do a psychological profile on the different members of the board, can you predict the behavior that's more likely to happen?
And in fact, we do have that. We've got some very well-developed instruments for trying to tap into. See, what I do, for example, is I'm not very interested in. This is going to sound funny. I'm not very interested in whether somebody is ethical or unethical. What I'm interested in is the decision process by which they go about resolving an ethical dilemma. And to me, that's sort of one layer below. And the really interesting one is when you're confronted with an ethical dilemma, what kind of reasoning do you go through to get you to a decision? And I think that if we're really going to understand how these things like Enron end up happening, I work with a lot of business people on the outside, and what I find is that business people are by and large really good people. There are very few of them that get up in the morning and take glee in the fact that they're going to be able to throw a widow into the street this morning or lay people off or ship jobs overseas. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah,
There's a couple of crooks out there, just like there is in most professions. But most of the big ethical meltdowns that we've seen, or what turn into these large-scale ethical meltdowns in companies, are basically people just trying to play tough, play hard, play within the rules, make a buck. They aren't bad people out trying to be evil, and that's true with the Wall Street scandals that hit. It's by and large true, with maybe one or two exceptions, even in places like Enron, that they were really people who were just trying to be good, tough, hard, honorable business people. And so what I'm really interested in is not so much the guy that wakes up, the Simon Legree that wakes up in the morning, you know, just sort of evil right from the get-go. What I'm interested in is the pretty good, honest, hard-working people that show up in a business setting, and next thing you know, either through their own fault or because maybe they didn't look enough moves ahead, they find themselves in a big hole, and now they're trying to figure out a way to scramble and get out of it. That's where most of it happens.
It's kind of okay, now that you're in the hole,
right.
Now what's your decision process,
exactly.
What's your rationale, what's your logic to making your next step?
Right. I do a little exercise in class where I auction off $1. And the only
you get
difference,
more than $1?
It has never failed. What happens is I lay the rules out to the students, and these are business students, they're supposed to know, and I auction off $1, and the auctioning, the bidding keeps going until it stops. But at the end of the bidding, whoever is in first place on the bidding gets the $1 and pays their bid, but whoever's in second place at that point has to pay their bid but doesn't get anything. And so what happens is the bidding will go up, 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 get very close to $1, and all of a sudden somebody's sitting there at 95 cents and somebody's at 85 cents, and the 85-cent guy realizes, if I don't go above, I'm going to have to pay 85 and I don't get anything. He'll bid $1, then it'll go $1.05, $1.10, $1.20. And I've had this auction go to $20, and it's not because these were bad kids, it's because they didn't think enough moves ahead, and all of a sudden they realize, well, if I don't bid $1.05 now, I'm going to be out $1, not getting. They're just trying to save. They got themselves into a hole.